Thank you for having me here tonight. Mary Beth Walker, I'm the interim assessor. And this evening, I wanted to talk to you about the 2024 revaluation. And this is to give you more information and to give the public more information, as there's been a lot in the news recently about other communities that have performed a revaluation this year. The city of Rochester has not done a revaluation since 2024. And so it is a mandatory state law that we do a reevaluation at least once every 5 years. And when you wait 5 years, as we have done, the change in the market is dramatic. So what we're going to end up having is a increase in values that may or may not surprise people. So first off, what is the point of a revaluation? During the revaluation, we'll be updating all of the values throughout the community. So that will be all commercial values, all residential values, and all of our exempt values. And the question would be, what is the market value as of April 1st, 2024? And that is what our team has been trying to determine. There's a process that we have to go through to do this, and part of that is to measure and list all of the properties that have sold. And we've gone all the way back to April 1st, 2023 for the residential, and we've gone back 2 years for the commercial, at least to start our initial study. So the next slide, we're going to talk about what is the role and consideration of the assessed values that were established in 2019. And so you received a spring bill this year, 2024, and the market value is the market value from 2019. That's when those values were established. If you had any permits or work done on the property or subdivisions or mergers, et cetera, between 2019 and springtime of 2024, your values would have changed. The values that were established in 2019 will have no bearing on the reassessment for 2024. We're literally recreating all values for the 2024 market. And so the old values are not used. In other words, we don't take what is the old value and then increase all properties by 20% or 40% or 50%. We take the different types of properties and we do a statistical study on them to determine what their new values should be. Do all of the property assessments change at the same rate? They do not. And what kind of differences would we be taking into consideration? If it's a residential property, we're looking at what is the use. So is it a condominium? Is it a single family, a duplex, a triplex, et cetera? What is the age, the condition, square foot, story height? What is the total living area, and where's the location throughout Rochester? All of those things will have an effect on what your market value will be. So we're using what's considered to be a snapshot in time. So we're looking at a value of April 1st, 2024, and that's important, and I could say it a million times because when you have a bank appraisal done, it's based on the date that the person went out there typically. And for the assessing office, we always use April 1st. That's the state law, and that's what, so April 1st of 2024. And then again, just to reiterate, we are using sales in a certain time period to determine those values. And so anytime you take a segment of sales, then you could move it to a different time period and your values would be different. So these are the time periods that we're using at this right now. So this slide shows some important information, and I won't go through it completely, but what is really important to know is that where are we starting? And we use median ratios to figure out in the assessing world what we're doing. So the first thing to understand is that we're taking what is your assessed value and we're dividing it by the sale price. And through that process, we come up with a ratio. And currently, before we start, our single-family homes are at 55% of market value, and we have to bring them up to 100%. The typical single-family home in this study shows that our median living area is 1,500 square feet, and the median sale price would be $410,000, and the average sale price is $425,000. Single-family mobile homes, important to know that we're starting out with 37% of market value, and the double wide at 52%. So just in that area, it's important to know because the single wide most likely will go up more in value than the double wide. So this is a point of showing you this slide so you have an understanding that not all property types are going to change at the same rate. The next slide is a little bit busy. The biggest thing that I wanted to point out to you, this is a 5-year ratio study. Right now, using the 498 sales that we would have in this ratio time period, we are at 52% of market value, and I need to bring the community up to close to 100% of market value. So the assessments are going to change considerably. Last year, we were at 58% overall, the year before 64.3, et cetera. So that kind of shows you the progression starting at 2020 all the way to 2024, how the market has moved in the last 5 years. If you go down the right-hand column, that shows in this ratio period, which the ratio period is from October 1st of 2023 to September 30th of 2024. That is the time period that the state of New Hampshire will be using to determine what our median ratio is. Going down the list, overall, we're at 52% of market value. Our single-family homes are at 54%. The condominiums are at 48%. Manufactured homes in general are at 47%. Commercial land and building, 71%. And our vacant land sales are at 43%. This is just a snapshot in time to show you quarterly how the ratio has changed. So in this year, quarterly, so in the year and a half, we've sort of leveled out. So we have changed dramatically since 2019, but over the last year to year and a half, we're showing that our sales are leveling out a bit. This slide is to show you just in different ways that we try to make some determinations on value. On the left-hand side is your year built. And what this shows is that the older homes are actually selling for more in comparison to the 2019 values for homes. And it's pretty consistent. If you go to the total living area, that shows that your 630 square foot to 1,000 square foot is around 53% of market value before we start. But going to the bottom, your 3,000 square foot is at 70%. So the smaller homes are selling for more in comparison to 2019 than your larger homes. So what does this mean? If you have a larger home, most likely it's not going to increase as much in value percentage-wise as the smaller homes are. Once we've completed the revaluation, which we hope to have completed towards the end of November, sooner if we can, but that's our deadline or our date that we've set for ourselves, the state of New Hampshire will set a tax rate. What you'll see is when we put the values out for your consideration, that your value probably has changed quite a bit. It may have doubled, it may have tripled in value, but the tax rate itself will go down. And you need to remember that the budget has already been set. So typically during a revaluation of this magnitude, the tax rate will go down. And we won't have a set amount until the state sets the tax rate, and that happens later. Once you receive your tax bill, you can file for an abatement if you do not believe that your market value represents April 1st of 2024. So when should you file for an abatement? You would ask yourself, could I sell my property for what it's assessed for? Does the assessing department have the correct information on my property? And you can go to our website and look at your property record card and try to look through it and see if we have correct information. How much are other properties that are similar to mine selling for, and what are they assessed for? Are they assessed similar to mine? You have until March 1st of 2025 to file for an abatement if you decide to file for an abatement. We will have the sales available on our website that we've used, and we also will be open and available for people to call us or to come in and ask questions. And finally, it's good to let you know what our exemptions and credits are available throughout the community. We have elderly, disabled, the blind, and the solar exemption. Anyone that we knew had solar power, we did send out a letter with a form asking you to sign it and get it back into our office so that you can, if you're eligible, be able to receive the solar exemption. That is a new exemption for this year. For our credits, we have the veterans credit, and then we have the 100% permanent disabled veterans credit, and we have a disabled credit. And each of those items do have information that you would have to meet certain requirements to be able to receive those. If you have not filed for an exemption or credit for 2024, you are not able to for 2024, but we do encourage you to seek out the information, and our deadline is April 15th of 2025 for the 2025 tax year. So that's what I have for information.
Thank you. Questions for the interim? Go, Tim. Councilor Button.
I have a couple. Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation. And I'll start out by saying that I know this is not your fault. I understand exactly how this process works, and I sympathize with your position because it's a tough one when the new values come out and people are trying to struggle with that. So one of the things I think I don't know if there's any way as a city, as a council, if there's any way to address some of the things. And I see a similar pattern happening as happened in 2019 in that because of the ratios, residential values have gone up more than commercial and industrial values. And I'll give a particular example. I remember in 2019, because I get a lot of calls right after the assessments come out, because people want to file abatements, and I have to explain to them just what you did about what the value of their property is. And so one of the complaints was that, okay, my assessment went up by $50,000 in 2019. And at the same time, the McDonald's on Wakefield Street assessment went down by $150,000. And I remember saying, well, the price of hamburgers hasn't gone down, and the length of the line of cars in the drive-through hasn't gone down. So how is it that the value of that property went down? And it's simply the square footage of commercial or retail restaurant values have decreased. But one of the struggles is that, as my years on the planning board, we were always told that our goal is to attract commercial and industrial users into town because they offset your tax base. They build these big expensive buildings, they pay good taxes, and therefore that offsets the residential tax base. That seems to be flipping. If residential tax values are increasing, residential values are increasing, and commercial and industrial property values are decreasing, suddenly the residential user is offsetting the tax base for the commercial industrial user. And so, I'm not sure how that then helps the city. But one of the other pieces that I was thinking of on page 26 it's 26 in our booklet at least, where it talked about the year built, those ratios, and then the total living area ratios. And so 630 square feet to 999 square feet, the ratio was 0.53, whereas the 3,000 to 3,600 square foot home, the ratio was 0.7. So the difference between the 1,000 square foot home in today's market is in the $300,000 to $350,000 value range, and the 3,000 to 3,600 is in the $600,000 to $800,000 value range, just as rough numbers. The problem is that in a city like Rochester, when I list a home at $325,000, I immediately have 50 showings and 15 offers. And when I list a home at $650,000 or $700,000, I have a few showings and hopefully a couple of offers. So the demand is much greater on those lower priced homes because more people in our community can afford those homes, right? If the average incomes are $60,000 or $70,000, that's the homes that they can afford. And yet, in this scenario, they are going to take the brunt. They are going to pay the brunt of this revaluation. Their valuation is going to go up by 47%, while the person that bought the $700,000 home, theirs is only going to go up by 30%. Not your fault, obviously, but I'm wondering how do we address that? Because it's not, in my mind, it's not that smaller, older, rougher condition, $300,000 home, the reason its value has gone up is simply because of demand. And how do we address that? How do we try to equalize that fact that if it was a simple per square footage formula, all right, everything was $197 a square foot, and now it's $270 a square foot or something. If we were simply using that formula, then the more expensive home would go up proportionately the same as the smaller home. But it's not going to, according to this chart, unless I'm understanding that wrong. The smaller home is going to go up significantly more per square foot than the larger, more expensive home. And it doesn't seem like an equitable situation. So I'm not sure if there's any way that through the city, through assessing, we're able to make any adjustments into that or not. I just see this as I see the burden of this going on those that can least afford it. They've already taken the burden on the property values and, on the trying to buy the properties, and now they're gonna get hit with that burden in the tax assessments as well.
So a response for that? I know it was a lot of comments.
So my response to that is you are very correct in how the market has changed. Because my job is to achieve market value, equity across the board, that would mean that I need to achieve market value for those smaller homes, the same as I need to achieve market value for the larger homes. So it is correct that the larger homes are going to go up percentage-wise less than the smaller homes because we are trying to achieve market value. There is nothing in the law that allows me to look at who's living in those homes, who can afford the change. Unfortunately, the situation that I'm in is to purely address whatever the market value is and bringing the assessments from where they were 5 years ago, or the spring bill, if you're looking at it that way, to market value now. And with that, it's not just the smaller homes, but that is why there's going to be such a large shift for mobile homes. If someone could not afford the single-family home on their income and in these economic times, then they may buy the mobile home so that they could live in Rochester. And it's not just Rochester. The changes are the same in all of the communities that I've done revaluations in the last 2 years when it hasn't been done in 5 years' time. But there isn't anything that allows me as the assessor by law or the council that I know of to change that. There's a assessing standards board and state laws in New Hampshire that dictate what we have to do to change the values.
Thank you.
Just something I want to add to what Councilor Fontenot said. In our next presentation under tax deed payment plan, we're going to address some of those concerns that you just brought up. So I appreciate you bringing it up. Thank you. Thank you. Councilor Hammond.
Yeah, I just want to clear something up in case some people are confused. April 1st is the date the state says is the date of the valuation.
Correct.
That's not the cutoff for the reevaluation to be performed, am I correct? So if I have April 30th, I start construction on an addition, and it finishes in May, I get my CO in May, June, whatever, for that addition, that will still come under the reassessment. Is that correct?
That is not correct.
That is not correct.
So our deadline for permits is April 1st. If a home was partially complete on April 1st and it's been completed since then, we would continue to assess it as if it's not complete. It's what percentage is there as of April 1st. If you received a permit to put a shed up on July 1st and you put it up on July 30th, we would not be picking it up for this assessment. So that would change in 2025. We would go back out and revalue for April 1st of 2025. So April 1st is our deadline for completion of permits.
Okay.
Councilor DeJarbois.
Thank you, Ms. Walker, for all the information so far. I have maybe it's a two-part question, partly for you and partly for Mr. Sullivan. Obviously doing this every 5 years is a really big shock, and I assume that there's a substantial effort and cost involved with doing the revaluation, but are there any plans to do the revaluations more frequently so that we don't have such large jumps for people? And then also the second part of this to Mr. Sullivan is, does this 5-year cycle as opposed to a shorter cycle have any bearing on our ability to do long-term financial projections for the city budget?
So I'll address the first part. The How frequently you do a revaluation is dependent on, do you have someone in the assessor's seat that is capable of doing the revaluation? And then if that person recommends to the council or finance committee that a revaluation is due or needed, then it would be up to the council to say, yes, that we can go ahead and do one.
So the second part of your question, what we have to recognize is there's two pieces. One is the valuation, which is the denominator of your tax rate. The amount to be raised by taxes is the numerator. When we're doing our budget adoption, we build the budget under the guidance of the tax cap to set the amount to be raised by taxes. So in that projection, we don't really look out to see what the revaluation numbers are going to be, because the amount to be raised by taxes is going to be the amount to be raised by taxes based on what the tax cap yield is every year. We do try to put some forecast in the annual budget to see if there's any new ads that sometimes come on during the year that aren't part of a statistical wide revaluation, and you do pick up some permit value. But to have a cyclical cycle or something that does something revals over a period of time, so you don't have this one large 5-year would help in adding some assessed value, keeping that assessed value, so we keep the tax rate kind of. Now, in this case, the tax rate is going, and people have to keep this in mind too, the tax rate's going to drop significantly. The values are going to go up, but the tax rate won't stay at 25.74. I'm not going to venture, I guess, on what that is. I'll defer to Mary Beth for that, so that's kind of a long-winded answer to the question.
Thank you.
You follow up? Go ahead.
I do. Could you explain the abatement request process? Who approves those? Is there an appeals process involved if you get denied?
Yes, so the deadline is March 1st after any tax year. So for this year, it will be March 1st of 2025 for the 2024 tax year, and you cannot file until after you receive your tax bill. The assessing team, the assessing department, it will be a combination this year of both Corcoran Consulting and the assessing staff. We'll look at all of the concerns presented by the abatement application, and if there's appraisals presented or other information, we'll go out and do an inspection of the property and remeasure the property if it's needed. And then we have a response that's given. Our first response and recommendation is given to the Board of Assessors, and they would sign off on our recommendation. From there, there is an appeal process that before September 1st of 2025, a property owner could file with the Board of Tax and Land Appeals or Superior Court if they felt that they still weren't satisfied with what their value is.
Thank you. One last one.
I think we'll very good questions.
The last question is, I know you spoke a little bit about the variables and how they're weighted, and that's set by the state, as I understand it, what factors you take into consideration. But is the time period of the analysis, I think you said 1 year from April 1st, 24 back for residential, 2 years for commercial. Is that fixed by state law, or is that at the city's discretion?
So the state does not set even what variables we use. It's the Assessing Standards Board that requires us to follow IAAO standards. And through that process, without getting into a lot of detail, there's a set process that we have to follow, but the goal is to be at market value. They require us to be between 90 and 110% of market value, with the goal always being 100% when you're doing a revaluation. And I think I forgot the second part of that question.
It was really just, does the city have discretion in terms of how far you go back? I mean, is that board, or is that standard you follow? Does that prescribe 1 year for residential and 2 years for commercial?
So we want the closest sales to April 1st, the same as if you were doing a bank appraisal. And the state of New Hampshire will use 6 months before that and 6 months after that to come up with our median ratio, hopefully close to 100%. When we do a study, when I do a study as a certified New Hampshire assessor, I typically will go back to April 1st of the year before, or if the market's been moving really fast, I may use sales from July 1st to July 1st, so that I'm capturing as close to April 1st as I can. The purpose of going back further with commercial properties is they don't change as much unless there's different types of economic influences on them. So if we go back 2 years, then we can capture more sales, local sales, because we do have New Hampshire sales that we will look at and take them into consideration. But we want to use local sales if we can. So if we go back 2 years, then we have a wider range of sales that we can use, bringing Rochester's market closer to what would be market value as of April 1st.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Sullivan, do you have a question?
Thank you. Yeah, well, after all those follow-ups, some of it got,
I answered.
some of it, but it was about, we'd heard at the Finance Committee that there was that target range of 90 to 110%. And my question was, in the interest of buffering the shock factor when you're at 53%, is that the guidance that the city should be using, the assessing office, when they have the feeling that we're below 90, then we should trigger the next revaluation?
Typically, in communities that I have, if we get below 90%, then they'll consider doing a revaluation.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Fontenot.
Thank you. So, yeah, I wanted to clarify and kind of talk about doing the revaluations more than every 5 years, too. You know, historically, real estate values went up about 2.5% or 3% per year. So 5 years would be between a 10 and a 15% increase. This year, the September numbers just came up, and we're up 17% from September 23 to September 24 in New Hampshire. So, you know, we're having these leaps and bounds increases over the last 5 years. It's not typical, you know. I can't imagine it going into the future at this rate very far. In the past, before the state changed the law and said you had to do them every 5 years, I remember when Rochester hadn't done it for 20 years, you know, back in the 70s and 80s. So it used to go a lot further than that. But again, I think the 90% rule may be a good way to watch for that. If we do have a huge increase over the next 2 years or something, we try to catch it again.
Thank you. Madam City Manager.
Thank you, Your Honor. Chief Walker, oftentimes there can be some confusion with tax years, especially in regards to revaluation and tax bills. And as we know, City Council recently increased the limitations and the amounts of many of our exemptions. Could you please clarify for our viewing public on when those go into effect, which tax bill? I know we have on here the application deadline.
Yes, so the City Council voted in a new set of guidelines for our elderly and our disabled, and those will take effect for 2024. So somebody who already has been approved for those exemptions, they will receive those increased amounts for the tax bill in 2024.
Thank you.
Councilor Carolorian.
Thank you. Thank you for your time tonight. For the new homeowners out there, could you just explain what they can expect for the actual process of this? Is it a curbside, or are they going to expect a knock on the door to come inside? The people that aren't really familiar with this process, could you just explain that real quick?
Yes, so we will continue to visit the sales as they occur, but we have visited all of the sales at this point in time. And typically what we would do is go to a property that has sold and we knock on the door and we ask to measure the exterior and to do an inspection on the interior. If no one is home, we'll measure the exterior and we'll leave a card for the assessing office asking them to call and make an appointment. And if it's not a good time, we also leave that card. If there's no trespassing, we do not go on the property at all. We typically will try to send a letter.
Thank you.
Just one last, do we know when we're going to actually see
She said hopefully November
November, and the tax rate will be set?
by DRA.
Right, but the date,
Go ahead. You can ask her.
dates,
Yes, so we expect to have the revaluation done no later than the end of November. And then there's forms that we have to fill in along with other forms that have to go to the Department of Revenue. And they will set the tax rate, and hopefully that will be set in mid-December, or towards the end of December.
All right, that looks like Chief Walker, thank you very much for that presentation. I've heard so many great things about you filling in.
Thank
And you certainly was demonstrated today. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Presentation tax deed payment plan.
Good evening. I'm Rachel Lochner. I'm the tax collector for the city of Rochester. I'm here tonight to seek authorization to enter into payment arrangements on behalf of the city with our taxpayers that are at risk of tax deeding. Just a quick overview, tax deeding can occur 2 years from when we lien a property, so it's about 2.5 years from the date of the last tax bill due date. Historically, the tax office has always entered into payment agreements with residents, but as a new tax collector with some new city council members, I did want to formally make the request. For this year, I'm deeding tax year 2021. We currently have 109 properties on that list, so I'll be sending out tax deed notices this month, which will give them 30 days to pay. The payment plans that have previously been entered into, they didn't have strict payment guidelines. So what I am recommending is with two approaches. First, for the people that are already behind in their property taxes, these are people that have been on payment plans for a certain amount of years, but maybe their payments weren't enough or the interest just kept compounding. We're going to take the total balance due, including calculating the future interest that will accrue, and give them a maximum of 5 to 10 years, depending on the balance to completely pay everything up to date. So they're not just having another year and another year accruing. So that plan, it will require a monthly amount towards the oldest and then pay all the current bills as they come out on time so they can eat away at that balance from both ends and get paid up. Second, for the people that only owe 2021 and newer, I'm proposing just a simple extension until the next year's deed date. So it would give them more time to pay 2021, but it wouldn't allow for exorbitant amounts of interest to accrue. We are working, I've had meetings with city manager, assessing, legal, welfare, and finance to increase the awareness, as Mary Beth touched on, the exemptions and the credits to get those resources to people before they're in the situation where it's in dire need. Does anyone have any questions for me?
Councilor DeJavois.
You know, I got questions.
Oh, how many?
One so far.
Great, great.
Thank you for the overview. I appreciate that you put the state law RSA 8076, and it says the collector shall execute the tax deed 2 years after the execution of the tax lien, but then it goes on to say essentially the municipality can waive that for any other reason that would be contrary to the public interest. Obviously, it's in the public interest to not be putting people on the street, right? And I'm all for that, but I do wonder, and it goes on to say, such a decision shall not be made solely for the private benefit of a taxpayer. I wish the city attorney was here. I don't know if anyone else from the city staff is able to speak to this, but is there any risk here of any perception of unequal treatment in how this is being applied for some people rather than others? Does that expose any challenges here, legally speaking, for someone who didn't have this, the benefit of one of these plans, maybe having an issue with this being done for others?
We have always had payment plans in the tax office, so I do want to be clear. Many of these people that are on the list to be deeded have been on a payment plan for an extended amount of time. So, I mean, we would be fair with everybody gets a chance to have a payment plan.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I could add
Yes, please.
just one more item to that, Counselor, is that back during COVID as well, the city had authorized a pause, so to speak, on tax deeding, and that it was extended for a period of time. So the city, in part, fell a little bit behind on the deeding out of consideration for public good, public benefit during that time frame. So then that does snowball a little bit where folks, in cases that they're not paying their taxes, that interest does need to accrue, which then makes it much more difficult to become whole. So it helps that immediate need, to your point about not needing to deed properties, but then to the tax collector's presentation, in that she demonstrated a nice graph here for us, that it can then make it much more difficult to pay back what is owed with the interest that's accrued under state law.
Thank you.
Question. Anything else? Thank you very much, presentation.
Thank you very
Nice
much.
to see you up here. All right.